Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Thursday, May 7th, 9:30 p.m. Long day at Florida International University. What is it? Southern Hemispheric Security Conference, chock full of knowledge. And we're going to use a little of our knowledge on an article I just saw a few minutes ago, which was not really put together the way a real news article would because it was in, Reuters and Yahoo News. But the question of it is still pretty interesting, and it revolves around an attack supposedly by the United States on an empty Iranian tanker. So we're looking at what's on the surface appears to be just you know, another small clash in the tense standoff between the United States and Iran. But buried inside the reporting, because they try not to give you real information, is a detail that may tell us more about where this conflict is headed. And it was the fact that an empty Iranian-flagged oil tanker was reportedly disabled by U.S. forces near the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. It was not sunk, it was not boarded, it was disabled. Supposedly, its rudder was struck, rendering the vessel unable to continue under its own control. Iran calls it aggression, Washington called it enforcement, and the markets reacted to the renewed tension, and then the world moved on. But we should pause on one simple question. Why was an empty oil tanker there at all? And if we're doing hypothesis now, which is more than what you'll hear in regular news, because if we answer that question, we may better understand what the United States is really doing in the Gulf. Normally, tankers travel in one of two states. They travel empty towards oil loading facilities, and then they travel away full from them, right? That's the rhythm of the oil trade. So when Reuters described this vessel as unladen, which is empty, and moving near Iran's export coast near Jask, Jask, in case I'm not saying it right, analysts should have immediately asked, was this ship, was it heading out or was it heading into load? The distinction changes everything because at first glance, an empty outboard tanker makes absolutely no sense, right? Or very little. Why send an empty vessel out from one of Iran's export zones? But an empty vessel moving toward offshore loading infrastructure or towards a ship to ship transfer point makes perfect operational sense. And that brings us to a larger possibility that this tanker was probably being positioned to become more floating oil storage for the Iranian oil system, which we know is now very close to the breaking point. And why would Iran do that? And it's simple, it's because of pressure. It is not military pressure, it is reservoir pressure. The oil fields cannot simply be shut down indefinitely without consequence. The wells can fail. It will take decades to repair them. When wells stop producing for long periods, the pressure goes down. Production systems become stressed, and restarting these facilities can become costly and technically difficult. Storage on land begins to fill up. The revenue is dried up, and every day the oil cannot move becomes another day of strategic or economic pain. So what do? They start to store oil offshore, which we know they have done already. You load it onto tankers and let them sit at sea. We call it floating storage or floating inventory, whatever you wish to call it. A strategic reserve that can be sold later when markets reopen or quietly transferred through the shadow networks if they can find a way to get it out, offshore blending or ship to ship movement. So, in short, you take the pressure off the wells and you buy time. That is exactly why this empty tanker matters and why it being stopped is very important. Because if Washington stops an empty vessel heading towards loading operations, then the United States may not be simply stopping exports, it may be stopping Iran from creating offshore breathing room, stopping Tehran from building maritime inventory, stopping the creation of a hidden oil reserve that can later become cash is not merely a blockade, that is control of the situation. And that suggests something even bigger. For decades, naval warfare was pretty simple. You sink the ships, you mine the harbors, you block the ports, And as I've been saying, and a number of other people have probably been saying too, is if modern sea power is looking different, what does control mean? Does it mean something simple, disabling the rudder of a sinking instead of sinking the ship, turning ships back instead of destroying them, allowing movement, but only under approved rules. Controlling storage, controlling the insurance, as we've discussed, controlling the timing and monetization. Not whether oil exists, but when can oil become revenue? When can it actually change from oil into cash in hand? And that is a different kind of maritime power. And if that is what's happened near Jask, then what looked like a minor ceasefire violation may actually have been a glimpse into a much larger strategic doctrine, which we have discussed in the past. The sea is no longer just a highway for commerce, it is becoming a gate, and someone is deciding who gets through and who does not. The empty tanker question may not stay small for long because sometimes the most important ship in the world is the one that's not carrying anything at all. So thanks for checking this out. If like, subscribe, yeah, yeah, yeah. And once again, if you had a chance to come to the show at the convention at FIU, I'm sure you were very, very happy with it. If you want to look at it again, it is every year. I would suggest anyone who's interested in OSINT or anything of that nature see the trends in world security or trends in hemispheric security. Florida International University, yeah, Florida Atlantic, right? Florida International University, the Jack Gordon Center. You can find it on there. It'll probably be this time next year. So with that, otherwise, have a good night, and I will talk to you later on. Goodbye.